Mary is an American, but is married to a man from Pakistan. She wants to study domestic violence of Pakistani women that live in the U.S. with Pakistani men. What are some things she can consider, and would this be a full board study? Again, I've seen all this since Friday. It's Monday. I think so. That's how I would do it.
Institutions of the immigrant group that would be considered, or an ethnic group that also be considered possible population review.
Absolutely. Because what would you need to know about Pakistani women? Their culture. You can't just, I can't just march in like, hi, I'm Heather, and I want to find out, you know, what's happening at home with your husband. You seem like a real jerk at the last football game. You can't do it. I mean, it would just be horrifying for that person. So what would you have to do? You'd have to know the culture. What about, I mean, I don't know a lot about this culture, so I would actually call in somebody who did to be a part of my board meeting, because I would want an outside expert. Because I think, are Pakistani women Muslim? Are they Muslim? Some are Muslim, not all, right? Okay. So you'd have to figure out what their religious, with respect to culture and religion, because if they were, some of the board meetings I have been on when the experts come in, is that the Pakistani women are so afraid of their husbands finding out if they were ever in an interview, they're too afraid. So they want to know, what assurances can you put into place? They want to tell their story, but what assurances can you put into place? Okay, so let's assume that we can find assurances and put into place. Who's qualified to do this, to talk about domestic violence? Let's say they know the culture and they know the religion. What type of person should be interviewing somebody like this? Somebody from there? But because you're from there, are you qualified if they start, like if you started talking to somebody about being abused by their husband, the chances of an emotional breakdown are pretty high. Exactly. So it gets to be this, so in situations where I've had students who want to interview somebody that they want to know about this because of their personal experiences, like they're a Pakistani woman who's been abused by their Pakistani husband living in America, using cultures from Pakistan, that, you know, doesn't mean that the student is okay. So what we've said, if you really want to do this, you need to have a therapist that you're paying for, who signs a disclosure agreement, who's certified to be there to provide services, because this topic is so sensitive and this woman is so afraid. We need to have an immediate person who can do an intervention. I've seen it with less sensitive topics where we say you need to have a list of resources that you can give to them, you know, and if it gets to be too out of control, the whole thing stops. You can get 2 minutes into it, get everything set up. It's a disaster. The therapist calls it, throws in the towel. You're out. No data. Right? Because you have to make sure that it's much better if you're a licensed therapist and you're conducting the interview versus if you're not a licensed therapist and you have to have one there. You see what I mean? So this is where your physicianality as a, like before I said you have your graduate student hat and your professional hat, but this is a place where it could intersect to be helpful. I would never approve a study, me personally, unless the student was a clinical, was either a marriage and family therapist who had gone through like at least a master's program and was in their like clinical psychology program. Not a chance I would do it. Too risky. It's sad. Now I'm just going to be sad.
It's actually what you're talking about earlier, which is managing risk.
Yeah.
You know, you're talking about managing the risk of the researcher.
Right.
And I think we forget to talk about the risks that we as researchers should and shouldn't subject ourselves to.
Right.
We should not put ourselves in a risky situation at all.
It's really not. That's why I don't want people like have interviews at their home or be in a position where you're not prepared to help your participant. You're not qualified. You wouldn't know what to do, you know? Okay. Oh, we're back to Kevin. He's on it. Kevin wants to study homeless people in San Francisco and how they were treated when the Super Bowl came to town. He wants to find people by walking around the street and interviewing them for a study. Kevin is not a trained therapist or counselor, but is a social activist. What types of precautions should be put into place? So I actually substituted, I heard this on NPR.
I was going to say, I've heard that on Friday.
Yeah. This is on NPR on Friday. But I have a study right now that I can talk to you about, but Jan probably here to speak more about social activists. Because social activists who are really passionate about a cause often put themselves in a space, but I have no training. So what would we do in this case with old Kevin?
His own safety, because the person he's approaching, he doesn't know this. It could be just somebody who's almost willing to talk, or it could be somebody
Who's homeless and
doesn't want to talk about that and
right.
not being having a good day.
Correct. Yeah, that's where you heard it. It was on NPR. So could he do this study a different way?
Maybe he could be involved in a homeless shelter environment, maybe soup kitchen or the food box line. You know, maybe there's an environment where these people would be there and then there would be, there would be access.
Right. He could have some more defined parameters around gaining access to the people rather than walking up to them on the street. And I hear that a lot from students. Well, I'm just going to walk up to them and like, oh, God, no, you're not. You know, like, you're not doing that. I say, nah, you're not doing it. So he could, like a homeless shelter. Homeless shelters have they're very diligent about protecting their populations. Battered women's shelters, anything like that, almost impossible to gain access to those unless you really are somebody who's very involved. I've seen good access with board members of those shelters will be more flexible in some cases, but safe houses and things that could reveal the identity of a participant, almost impossible to get access to. Not 100%, there's always an exception, especially if they're trying to find out a common theme or they're trying to get federal funding and they need data. I saw some studies that I could not believe they got access in Appalachia, am I saying it right? In Appalachia, because of the huge amounts of domestic violence and poverty, like just, you know, poverty, like extreme poverty, and they were looking for federal grants, and so they wrote down that, okay, we'll give access knowing that these data that this researcher collects will be able to be used for us to apply for federal grant funds. They were desperate, essentially, to allow access to a graduate student to get in there. But they really wanted to see if the data could get them the money. So, all right. Carrie wants to attend an AA meeting in her local area to see what they're doing. Her thesis is looking at community resources to support persons with mental disabilities that are subsequent drug users. What should she do prior to observing at the AA meeting? Does anybody know about AA?
I was going to say, yeah, she's not going to.
No, it's actually, unless it's changed, AA has open access at their meetings.
I thought that was just Alan.
Unless you went ahead, talk to the moderator. No, I've seen it where they let them, and some moderators will let them say in advance that they're allowed to, like, give like a 1 minute or have a flyer sitting at the door. I've seen that happen in Minnesota. So it could be different in different states. And that's the whole thing, is that I guess my point here is, like, it can be with big organizations that are organized, like AA, the American Diabetes Association, the Arthritis Foundation, different big organizations, Boys and Girls Club. They can have some local control, and then they have bigger control, and it just, you have to dig and find out. And like you said, so if you're in California, I might sit down, nobody's going to talk to me, I'm not going to do anything, you know what I mean? Like, it might be a waste of my time to get data, whereas in some states, you could go there. But in AA, you can walk in. You don't have to be.
Minnesota's a little different because my center is kind of like the mecca of like recovery. They have like, you know, a different perspective on people coming in. Right. They do have so much of the research comes from there here.
That's interesting.
In California, we all have there's different, no matter what state you go to, it's different.
Mm-hmm. Right. But as an organization, you don't need permission to go. You can just go. So knowing the loopholes of not the loopholes, that's not what I want to say. Understanding who your gatekeepers are so you can start to empower yourself with what you need to know, that's the key. Because what might seem really easy might not be easy, and what could be easy, you know, might in fact be easy. Public officials, elected officials. How easy is it to access elected officials? They're exempt. You can walk right up to them and ask them whatever you want. Yep. It's written down in the federal regulations. If you're an elected public official,
Yeah. They got people for that.
Yeah.
If you can get past the bodyguard, right?
You pass the bodyguard and the no comment, but technically you don't need, for elected officials, you can actually go right to them. However, if you want to ask the supporting staff in the office of an elected official about their leadership style, about how the organization is run, you have to go to that elected official to get permission to talk to the staff. Not going to happen, right? So then you have to look at alternative methods. So if you wanted to find out, like I was just looking at a study where the student wants to look at the, I don't know what you call it, like the number one assistant to the elected official. Yeah, but they have a name, some political name. I can't remember right now. But he's on a network where he knows all of these people, like at this lateral level. So he's going to recruit through that network because he knows he's never going to get permission from every city council member to talk to these people who support them in their constituency. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what it is. So for every single study, everybody always says, do you have an example IRB application that's filled out, Heather? And I always say I don't. I don't do examples because what I found is when I've done examples, everybody kind of copies the example. You can't help it. What do you do? Because every single study, depending upon how you ask the question and who you want to know it from and how you're going to get the data and where you're going to collect it is different. You very rarely find two things that are exactly the same because what might seem the same, like going to an AA meeting in California and Minnesota, we just learned is very different. So every study has its own unique set of gatekeepers, and what you as graduate students need to consider is how long is it going to take you to get access through the gatekeepers, and then once you've got access and you're in the gate, how long is it going to take you to collect the data? Like the other Kevin with the brain tumor kids. He could probably hang up signs and go to boards, and how quickly? As a mother of a child with brain cancer, how quickly am I going to sign up to be in a research study? And the other thing I would say is that you have to remember what's really passionate to you, like what you really love, is not for anybody else but you, right? And when was the last time, was I just saying this to Carlene or Dan? When was the last time that you did something for somebody you didn't know? Not a volunteer organization, not a friend's son, you're not buying cookies, you're not selling magazines, you're not for somebody you don't know, never saw it in your whole life. When was the last time you did something for that person for 3 hours? Yeah, let alone disclosing personal information, right? Yeah, exactly. How, tell me about your, well, I was telling Carlene and Dion, I had one student who was interested in going to a meetup group about hiking because he heard in that meetup group it was a polyandrous situation that most people practice polyandry. So he wanted to go to a hiking group to try to recruit people to talk about being polyandrous. I was like, the last thing you want to do when you're going hiking, if you think you're going hiking, is be approached by a graduate student to talk about what his buddy told him about the sexual preferences within the group. I mean, I'm like, dude, I was like, I said, I guess if you want to go and hand out a card, but I think your response rate is going to be low. I mean, as a person who goes hiking, I mean, I would just be like, this is not the time and place. I don't, you know, like, it's just, so you have to think about, you know, one of my favorite all-time things was a student who wrote, I'm going to recruit blind people with this flyer. I laughed about that for weeks. How will they see it? I mean, I didn't know what to ask except how are you going to see it? I don't know. It's, oh, Heather, I didn't think about that. I'm like, yeah, it's the first thing I thought of. I mean, sometimes it's a lot. What else did I hear recently? When I eat from student in Washington, when I eat hot chocolates in Colorado, everybody eats it. You guys can't eat it yet. You will. We're paving the way for you in Colorado.
We can, I'm from Oregon.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Yeah. So, you know, pot candy. You can go to the dispensary and you buy it, and it comes in different milligrams. I mean, you can just go and buy it, right? I mean, it's legal, right, in Colorado and Washington. And so, one of the students asked me, well, when I eat, they're like little 10 milligram hard candies. I find myself way more open with my therapist. I'm like, okay, you know, agreed. I suppose, you know, I can understand that. And then he said, I would like to prescribe my participants hot candy, and then I'm going to be the therapist. And I'm like, but that's not going to happen because A, you're not a medical doctor, and you can't prescribe marijuana, even though there is medical grade marijuana and it's medically appropriate in this state. You cannot simply say, hey, last time I took a you suck at candy with 10 milligrams, I opened way up and found my inner peace. Like, no, I'm sorry. You know, so you have to be very careful about what's passionate and works for you is okay to passionate and okay and safe for the other person. And if you're qualified to do it, because you're not you can't do medical stuff. One of my students, well, I don't want to keep telling. I could sit here for days and tell you about the last 2 weeks, right? It's not the last weekend. But what I would like you to do is it's 5:48. How about we spend like 10 minutes or so writing down what you think your obstacles might be, and then we'll take a 15-minute break, and then we'll come back and we'll all go around and we'll share our obstacles.